Who's going to start?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalu salati wa atamu taslim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We welcome you to another edition of My Scattered Thoughts, which is now mixed with other scattered thoughts. And we've been reflecting on the 5th African American Islamic Summit. And today we have two esteemed, honorable family members. I don't like to consider them guests because we are a family. And that's how I look at all of our brothers and sisters. I don't look at us as a separate entities. Even if we work in separate aspects of our community, we are one community. We are one family. And I think that is something we need to, make as a constant among us, that stop looking at each other as just, no, we're family. Don't look at each other as some, this guy over there, some distant stranger. No, we're family, right? And when we start feeling that way, we'll start acting that way. And I think whenever we have discussions and we look at ourselves as a family, then even discussion is going to be different. I always talk about the family aspect. Even with my non-Muslim family, we're able to have the most harsh conversations, which we will never have in public, right? You're like, wait a minute, I thought you was an imam. Oh, this is family stuff. We have conversations that should not be televised, but we never ever separate. Even after those harsh, rough, brutal conversations, we still move together as a family. And you will notice at the summit, some of you will be witness, my family, non-Muslim family, was actively participating in the summit. And that's because of the relationships we have as a family. So what should be it as Muslims, as believers, as Allah said, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, that the believers are nothing but brothers. And when we have that words before al-mu'minun, that's restricting the meaning of believers. Like, innamal mu'minuna ikhwa. Only real believers are brethren, right? It's restricted. It can't bear another meaning. So this is important. So let's look at each other as family. We are one family. So among our family members is our esteemed Imam Dawud Walid, who did his presentation at the summit, and our brother Maurice Hines, who I would like many of us to get to know as a young brother, younger than me, so I get to say young brother, but he's not so young, 40 years old, who has done a lot of good work that is needed in our community. If you remember Imam Talib, his presentation on Saturday was developing an Islamic intelligentsia in our community. This young brother has 3 master's degrees. He's traveled abroad in his studies. And I think he has some key elements, skill sets that are needed in the family. So I wanted to also have him with us. I'm getting old and a bad memory, so I forgot all about his good work, but he reminded me, so that's a good thing. So I'm going to let Imam Dawud start off with his reflections. And, there's no time limit for me. There's only is when y'all get tired. Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق وخاطر لما سبق ناصب الحق بالحق وهادي إلى صراط الله المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره مقداره العظيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters in Islam, assalamu alaikum. And it's good to be on this morning with our beloved Imam Amin, who's one of the lions of our community, not just for our shab, meaning the African American people, but for the Muslims here who reside in the wilderness of North America. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him and preserve his family and preserve the brothers and sisters at Masjid Muhammad. So my reflections, I will try to keep them brief so that Brother Maurice can share, and then Imam Amin and I will then we'll all have a discussion together before we go about our business for the day. Well, I would say that there was what we could say parts of the conference that were arranged that really weren't officially part of the conference, but then those things were at the conference itself, meaning the hall. And I want to conjoin these together because it's very important. So the first of these is that on after Khutbah al-Jum'ah, and mashallah, our Sheikh Abdul Karim Yahya Hafizullah Ta'ala gave a wonderful and very inspiring Khutbah al-Jum'ah that we gathered together to have some discussions in regards to some very foundational aspects of our deen that many of us as African Americans have been miseducated about. And this is due to the influence of the so-called Salafi Dawah, or if not us directly being involved in part of it, what we can say, the traces of the Dawah that have permeated the American Muslim community and the foreign influences that has affected some of our indigenous Islamic movements. And we feel this is very important. Which, because if we don't get our creed right, if we don't understand our ahkam right, or the rulings correctly and their sources, the methodology, and also the sciences of inward directedness or spiritual purification, we call tasawwuf, then we can't get anything else right? And this has been part of our problem. I believe is not just an issue of organization or lack thereof. Is actually what is our starting point as Muslims that will lead to us having healthy individuals spiritually, which then leads to us having healthy community. So it was Sheikh Nasser. He presented Sheikh Abdul Karim Yahya and myself, and these are basically going over aspects of Hadith Jibril alayhi salam, we could say, in terms of what are the foundations of the legal principles of ahkam or fiqh was going over, and this represents Mel Islam and Hadith Jibril. Mel Iman, or what is Iman, what is faith, is represented in the basic creed of Islam, in which I went through certain points from Imam Nasafi, rahmatullahi alayhi, his aqidah in regards to those. How do we understand objective truth from an ittiqadi perspective? Like, what's objective truth? Because we live in a day and time now where people say, you have your truth, you have your truth, you have your truth, I have my truth, and they're all true, which people have made truth subjective, basically that people's feelings are true. So we had to deal with that based upon a proper aqidah. And then we also went and touched on, or I also touched on, the fakir also touched on the problems of tajseem wa tashbih in regards to anthropomorphism and corporality, and how this totally goes against normative Islam, in which, quite frankly, and we pointed out that al-Wahhabiyya, in how it's influenced us, this is not the Aqidah of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu. It is not, right? So that was going over, and then Sheikh Abdul Karim went over tasawwuf, what is, we could say, Mel Ihsan and Hadith Jibril, about what is Ihsan, what is spiritual excellence or spiritual beauty. So we went over that, and then of course we had our special beloved brother who flew in from Yemen, Sidi Nader Khan, who really brought forth spirit to the gathering Friday as well as Saturday with a number of poems. And I know he told me he's working on a new project, and inshallah that'll be dropping, but including that, reciting a couple of qasidas that were written by Habib Umar, Hafizullah Ta'ala, right? So it was very blessed, brought spirit to the gathering. This is also part of the reorientation we need and the influence of Wahhabism upon us, because we're a songful people, we're an ecstatic people, and we came from the church background, and we were made to believe that poetry and song, and to be able to express ourselves with love and having spiritual taste, that somehow that was following the way of the kuffar, not knowing that this has been part of our tradition, going back to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Bani Najjar, singing Ta'ala al-Badru alayna to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the original Qasidatul Burda that was written by one of the great companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and many of them were poets. Al-Abbas was a poet, Hassan ibn Thabit was a poet, Ali ibn Abi Talib was a poet, etc. Of some of the highlights that from the discussions that we had on Saturday and Sunday, and there was a lot that was discussed, but I want to keep it to basically three points, and I'll save the ones with maybe a little more controversy as we go down, right? I'll restrict mine to the 3 points in the actual summit itself, or discussions. But before going to those 3 points, generally speaking, the mood, the vibe was fantastic. The crowd size increased. I've been to other African American Islamic summits. MashaAllah, the crowd was wonderful. People coming in and people coming out, people coming from different areas, and not just African American Muslims, by the way. One Moroccan brother flew all the way from France. He watches us on the internet and felt compelled to come. Sister, a white American sister, drove in her car from Texas. I think it took her almost like 4 days, where she drove up by herself. She looked like she was probably in her 60s, and she drove all the way from Texas. There are people that came from a long distance. There was a brother that came before. He emailed me. He couldn't come this year, but he had flew in before from Bermuda, right? So there are people who came from far and wide, from Cali to Texas, all over to Canada as well. I spoke with a sister who came all the way from British Columbia, and she says that she and her children, that they have a hard time connecting with Muslims who are Black out in British Columbia. So they came all the way from British Columbia, right? Like that's above Washington State to come. So alhamdulillah, the vibe was beautiful. The conversations, the food was prepared by us, for us, fubu, for you, by you. So we weren't eating a bunch of maqluba. I like maqluba. We weren't having no maqluba and having no baba ganoush and all that. We were eating our food, and sisters having bean pie, and things like that. So that was really fantastic. So the vibe was phenomenal, and this is what our souls need, and especially with COVID-19 and the lockdown, that a lot of people felt disconnected from Jama'ah, and there's something healthy about being connected to community. For our souls need to be connected to community. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a vigorously authenticated hadith, "Alaykum bil Jama'ah," that it is incumbent upon you to stick to the collective, to stick to the group. Thumma yadullahi al Jama'ah. Al yadillahi ma'al Jama'ah, right? And the yad of Allah is upon the Jama'ah, or the Yad of Allah is with the Jama'ah. And these are all min akhwal al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right? So this is beautiful. Now, the three things I want to focus on. One is that Sister Sabria, and again, we had discussions from elders. Imam Talib, Hafizullah Ta'ala, was speaking yesterday morning. I suggest you all go back and listen to that. He spoke. There was a panel just with elders that spoke, and it was beautiful. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a vigorously authenticated hadith that barakah is with your elders. Barakah is with your elders, right? So that was good. And by the way, before I finish with these points, I know my mind, new things keep coming up. May 19th is Malcolm X Day. And Imam Talib leads that up now. And so I suggest for those of you who are close, I normally go, but I have a wedding to perform on Friday. But for those of you who are close by, I strongly suggest that you join Imam Talib for the annual ziyarah to Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz radhiyallahu an, and his wife, Dr. Hajja Betty Shabazz rahmatullahi alayha, and part of our connection, and we're talking about African American Islam, Islam in general in America, that for Islam to establish itself in this land, we have to venerate and recognize the awliya of this land, because there are awliya in this land. And if there's any person who is a saint or a friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this land, then I would say Malcolm has to be one of those people, right? And in my opinion, he's a mirror of Sayyidina Hussein in this land. Now, Sister Sabria Mills, Sheikh Abdul Karim's wife, led us in an exercise I think that was very powerful, in which she had written 4 movements up on the wall. It was kind of like a discussion / breakout session, and talked about the positives and the negatives of those things that we could glean benefit from, and of those things that we could learn to stay away from. And those movements that were written on the wall were, and we're not talking about the orthodoxy of the creed of these movements. We're talking about movements that have influenced all of us who are in this community as African American Muslims, one way or another. One is the Nation of Islam. We know that Imam Muhammad's Jama'ah grew out of the Nation of Islam. So Nation of Islam was one. The Dar al-Islam movement is number 2, which we know Imam Amin, Allahumma farj anhu, may Allah free him. Imam Jamil's movement comes out of the Dar al-Islam movement. We have Ansar Allah, which our beloved brother Amin, Imam Amin, used to be part of Ansar Allah. He used to be Ahbaj too, mashallah. He's been connected to different things, right? And historically, and then we have the other one was the Salafi movement. So these were the 4 movements that we all discussed and wrote up some of the positive traits and the negatives of those. One of the traits that I would say that was looked at of the positives of these movements, or at least some of these movements, was the issue of organization and leadership, and a level of uniformity, as well as rules in which there was enforcement within those groups of certain norms and mores, in which there wasn't freestyling, especially when we're talking about the nation and Ansar Allah in particular. No, there was no freestyling. You had the hukuk, or responsibilities. You had to go out and work. You had to come up with that paper money. You had to come up with that $100 a day selling incense. I remember back in the day, traveling to New York and going to the subway and seeing the Ansar brothers selling those books. The only brothers I've ever seen walking through the subway train, you going through Brooklyn, and they holding up incense, walking through the train selling books, but people had to work, unlike today, where they expect everything from the community and aren't willing to do any sacrifice, right? Which is this is part of our state. If we were to be frank or honest, we only expect the imams and a couple of other people to do all the work. And then when the imam doesn't do what we want him to do, then we complain about the imams or what they're not doing. Now, it wasn't like that in the nation, and it wasn't like that in Sarallah, right? So these are some of the things. Of course, it was pointed out the issue of being careful of cultism and cultish type of behavior towards leaders. And we also know the excesses that took place in some of these movements, as well as when it comes to Wahhabiyya, about foreign influence and foreign control over our internal matters, even how we see ourselves, right? And this is also another problem with Wahhabiyya. Wahhabiyya told our people, not only is the Aqidah batila, because Allah ain't up on this, he ain't up in the sky, he ain't sitting up on no chair, he doesn't have any physical body parts, but also this nonsense idea that our qawm, meaning African Americans, aren't our people. They aren't our people. Those are just kuffar, and then to the extent of there are no real scholars amongst your people. They're all in Bilal Tawheed, right? Meaning they're all in Saudi Arabia, right? That's what we were taught. And unfortunately, we still have many of our people are still hypnotized by this dawah, and literally hypnotized. So this was one of the panels at Sister Sabria, and it was interactive, and I thought that it was quite beneficial and also educational. There were some young people in there. There are people in there who had never even heard of Ansarullah, right? This is part of our history, right? I knew, as I mentioned, I knew about Ansarullah. Also, I used to be a hip hop head back in the day. I remember KMD, that song Peach Fuzz. I mean, that was the first rap song I ever remember where the brothers were dressed sunnah. They had on white amama, they had on white thobes. KMD, who later became MF Doom. He's passed away now. I mean, that was the golden era of hip hop and black conscious, rap music back then, and that was from my generation. That was a lot of brothers and sisters dawah to Islam, was that rap music of the late 80s and early 90s, right? Until the Cristal Pop and P Diddy scene and all that, right?
While we counting the merits of those Ansar days, there wouldn't be no Jay-Z if it wasn't for the Ansars.
That's right. That's right. Big Jazzo. I remember that too. I remember seeing Jay-Z in that video. Somebody told me that Jay-Z back then had taken his shahada back in the days of Ansar, but really didn't rock full-fledged. No, we might need a dawah program to call some of these old rappers, come into the deen, because a lot of them were influenced, and some of them took their shahada too. The second point that I want to get to is the panel that I was on with Imam Naim and Imam Fahim, two of the three Imams of the Imams Roundtable. And, there was some things that were discussed in the community. And in particular, I told you the controversy is coming a little bit more with each point. But, a discussion about, what really qualifies leadership in our community, and especially when it comes to the position of imam, right? Because a lot of people got twisted, and we also have to raise the bar, right? Regarding we're not a community that we used to be. We have people amongst us who are educated, who've gone abroad and further studied here, who have ijazah and texts in different disciplines, right? Who've spent decades. Imam Amin and I were talking about this just from some of the imams who were speaking there. We have no less than 60 years, abroad in studies, right? So on the one hand, no group of people should be coming to us trying to dictate how we apply this deen in this land, because we have more right, because we understand the fiqh al-waqi, we understand the facts on the ground. There's certain things that we as Black folks just intrinsically know because of how long we've been here, and we can feel the pulse and heartbeat of where things are going in America, right? That other people who immigrate here don't understand it viscerally the way we do. That's just facts, right? On the same hand, we need to understand the issue of charlatans, right? Or people who maybe haven't really studied or didn't finish any program and became popular or influencers. So influencers are not imams or leaders, right? So when people start railing about certain controversies that go in the community, say, well, the imams, or why didn't the imams do so? Imams did that. Number one, imams do know things and address things in certain ways the best they can behind the scenes to give nasiha and also warn people. And if people fall into certain traps after being warned, then you can't, but you don't know it, you can't go back and blame the imam for Little Red Riding Hood going down to the woods and she got devoured by the big bad wolf, as Imam Fahim said, right? And I mentioned that specifically relating to something that was going on in the community recently that's online. I don't have anti-social media, but some people sent me some clips, so or it was about some different things going on about someone who people claim was an imam that devoured about 30 Little Red Riding Hoods, allegedly, right? So that was also addressed, as well as brothers know what they should be doing, and sisters, especially from our people, know what they should be doing. So there's a lot of like false piety going on, or like faking innocent, right? But this is why we need institutions and support leadership, not to undermine leadership, because when we have our proper institutions and we have leadership, we are better to enforce our moral code amongst ourselves. But when when institutions are weakened and we actually undermine our leadership, we actually undermine that which can protect us from charlatans, or from influencers who people confuse or think that they're ulama, or to protect not only Little Red Riding Hoods, but I think it was one of the sisters who made a reference to the old Salt and Pepper song, "I'll Take Your Man." That was they had a go-go beat. I think that was like maybe 88 or 89. I know I was in high school when that came out, right? Because that's going on too, right? So that was the second part. Now the third part, that was the third panel, was the last one I saw. I wasn't there for the closing, and that was the spiciest one, right? That was the spiciest one, and that was the panel discussion on polygyny, right? So there were two brothers with wives on there, and then there was Imam Amin, and then Ustad Nuruddin Knight, who also were co-panelists. And mashallah, there was a panel the week after the conference on the Black Imams Roundtable, where Sister Madonna Knight, Nuruddin Knight's mom, actually spoke, and they were talking about marriage in our community and also the issue of polygyny.
She's also my mother-in-law as well.
Mashallah, mashallah. May Allah bless her.
I forgot. Man, I'm getting more stuff. I forgot. Yes, mashallah.
Yeah, so
Imam Dawud, I'm getting old. My mind, I forget everything.
Yeah, both of us. So that conversation, the conversation was good and kind of went south when there was one sister who made some comments and brought up a personal issue, and then the conversation got derailed. But I would say one of the takeaways from that discussion, just in general, is that we have to grow up and be a more mature community, right? And that discussion, I think, would have been, my personal opinion, and this is this is healthy. This is just a healthy critique, not a criticism per se. I think that discussion should have been like before a breakout or gender separated, where you have men's only conversation and women's only conversation. I don't think it should have been that way and how it was, and especially when they were young people who were in the room and were negatively influenced when the conversation somewhat devolved and got off track. But, that's a very sensitive conversation. It's touchy. And, we as an American Muslim community have to mature. And in general, this issue of marriage, number one, we do have a slew of sisters who are single, who need to get married. At the same time, a brother who can't do monogamy right has no business trying to do polygyny, right? And we have a lot of brothers who aren't not even married at all, or those who are married at all, they're not even doing the one right? But this is my opinion, this issue is for the khawas, right? It's only like the elite of our community, spiritually and emotionally, can even broach this topic. So I would just say that's the only comment that I would have to say in regards to that. But that did leave some sisters. I spoke after that panel with 3 different groups of sisters, and some of them, not all, some of them kind of had like a bad taste in their mouth about how that panel went, and especially with the sisters' complaint and how it was answered. But alhamdulillah, I would expect that next year's African American Summit will be even larger than this year, because people see the need, and I encourage you all to support this endeavor. And really, we have to go around the country and spread this message. And this is a fardun kifaya. This is a communal obligation upon us. And it's not everyone's job to go out and spread the message. This is for those who are selected, but it's everyone's responsibility to give moral and monetary supports. And so in closing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. He said, let there be amongst you an ummah, literally, but it's a group that calls towards khair. So number one, there has to be organized da'wah. And that's not everyone's responsibility. It's a communal responsibility, but those who are qualified are the ones who are sent forth to give da'wah and enjoin good and forbid evil, right? And again, this isn't everyone's job to go out into the broader public or go to politicians and enjoin the good and forbid the evil. No, it's a select core group of us who are educated, who have that specialty, right? It's not everyone's job to be involved in these social political issues, right? On the front lines. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. The community and those who organize around this, they shall be successful. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the command, and then he gives a promise of success for those who fulfill the commands, right? Calling towards the good, the khair, enjoying the ma'ruf, which is wholesome and what is just, forbidding the munkar, which is immoral and unjust, right? This is the communal responsibility, and this is not everyone's individual responsibility, but it's everyone's responsibility to support the collective effort as much as they can, at the least moral support and making dua. And at the least, as Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani al-Hanbali said, that some of the Salaf, when they saw a munkar and they could not change it, didn't have the authority, they would say, Allahumma hadha munkar. So, oh Allah, this is a munkar. This is resisting in their heart. They literally would make this dua, the supplication, acknowledging to Allah, oh Allah, this is immoral, indecent, and this is unjust. They would at least do the supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With that, I will conclude with my comments.
Go ahead, Brother Maurice. The floor is yours. Let me ask something. Are y'all pressed for time? Because we're getting close to the 1 hour, but I think this deserves, if y'all got a little bit more time so we can discuss.
Yeah, I can probably go over maybe a half hour.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I have to be gone by 8:30, Imam.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, good.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Imam Amin, and thank you for your comments, Imam Dawud. Alhamdulillah. I enjoyed the conference. You know, like I stated in my blog post, I'm basically new to the U.S. again, just moving back here from Egypt in January, and alhamdulillah, I like what I see, what's happening in the Black Muslim community. Before I left, I was living in North Carolina, and I did kind of make a conscious decision to work within the African American Muslim community. Um, even though some other communities did kind of want me to do things for them, but one of the things that I left off at was an oral history project, um, to try to gather some of the stories of the people, the pioneers of that community in North Carolina, and I learned a lot from it. And so some of these ideas that I bring up in my blog posts, they sort of go back to some of what I learned from um, doing that oral history project, as well as some other things that I guess were triggered within the conference. So one of the things that I point out in the post, it's on my blog called The Marchives, which I do deal with a lot of different issues. We can talk about that at some other point, but the first one had to do with Imam's role as a politician, and I think that really came up after Fajr, that Sunday morning, on the 7th. Um, uh, Imam Amin was talking about the political acumen that uh, he and other New Jersey Muslim communities have. Um, Being now that I'm situated here in New Jersey, I've seen some of this. I've seen more than my fair share of politicians since I've been back, which is something different than what I know in North Carolina. So it seems like, at least in New Jersey, a lot of the Muslim communities are very much rooted in the local politics. Um, in one, Shortly after I got here, I was kind of in a meeting with two of the imams from this area. Um, they weren't necessarily African American imams, but one was an imam at an African American mosque, and he was sort of running down a lot of issues that he deals with. Um, you know, People who are dealing with homelessness, who are dealing with the criminal justice system, um, lots of issues having to do with marriage, some of them international issues, and I posed to him this question because he's a very learned person. Back in Africa actually, and he's from a lineage of scholars, and so I just asked him if he felt that his training prepared him to deal with these issues that he's facing as an imam, in the inner city in New Jersey, and he said no, but it's very difficult for him to explain to parishioners or people in the congregation, um, that he's not necessarily qualified to deal with all of these issues, and even sometimes he's gotten into a little bit of a legal issue, um, dealing with things. So you know, on the one hand, you know, yes, he has a Islamic training, a strong Islamic background in the Islamic sciences. Um, but on the other hand, he needs all these other elements from the Muslim community to kind of help him. Whether it's people who are lawyers, people who are doctors, people who have you know other specialties that can help out with these situations. So, uh, Imam, yes, it's a politician. I know both you, Imam Amin and Imam Dawud. You've worked with local politics, even national politics as well, and I see that as one of the strong points, particularly of African Americans. Um, and even when I was doing my oral history project, the founder of the main founder of the Muslim community there, he was very much engrossed in local politics, and he helped get even some of the immigrant masjids, zoning permits and things like that, uh, based off of who he knew. And so I guess that's kind of dealing with the first 2 points. The daughter Iftat. I was just actually having a conversation with my father-in-law about that before the conference, and just how we need sort of these quote unquote Islamic courts, Sharia courts or whatever they want to call them. Um, After living in Egypt, I got a sense of how they actually how they work, and of course they're non-binding, and in American society, people opt into religion, um, and it's not something that is necessarily on their ID cards or anything like that. So we should be, as a community, and particularly imams and people in leadership, they should be working on solving issues. And I think the situation that was brought up at the conference, without going into any of the details, if a sister feels like she's trapped in a marriage or something like that, it's very easy here in the society just to be like, I'm not Muslim anymore, you know, and that's the end of that. Um, and they can go to the course or whatever, but what do we offer as a solution that keeps their 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 deen intact, keep their hearts intact and their dignity. Um, so I would just like to see us work more on those types of things. Um, as for the last point that I made in the post, having to do with uh, polemic culture, um, you know, I kind of I'm kind of always an outsider looking in. So um, I'm thinking about the rest of the African American community. They're looking at the Muslims, and they're like, oh, where you're arguing over this point and this point and this point, and people don't have any idea what those things are. Um, why can't you all just get along, as you said with the Rodney King comment? But
Which is obvious. I'm not a fan of that, right? But go ahead. Totally not a fan of Rodney King Islam. Not
yeah,
Rodney King Islam, not microwave Islam. All that is beyond my scope. But go ahead. We'll
I
come.
understand. I understand. People, do what they do what they feel, but um, you know, I feel like from what I gathered from my oral history project, learning about the elders and speaking to a lot of elders, they particularly in North Carolina. Let me just give that example. Most of the elders in that community, they came from one community, but over time, some people, they embrace the more, the Salafi doctrine. Some people, embrace Shiism. Some others, there's firmly with Walid Muhammad community, and there's a whole spectrum there. And what I saw was basically that a lot of some of these issues actually came down to personal disputes, even though they did have these ideological disputes as well. Um, and I will say, actually, when Imam Amin and Sheikh Yahya Rodas uh, came to visit Durham, North Carolina that one time back in, I think it was 2016. Um, that was probably the first time that many of those elders were in the same room together since, you know, 30, 40 years ago. And, and I understand why these things happen. And I'm not saying that everyone should just join one masjid and, sing kumbaya. But I think there are smarter ways to get around these issues. Um, Particularly if you like direct action, you know, getting people who perhaps wouldn't even listen to this program uh, in the same room together, or at least on the uh, same virtual space, and talk out those issues or some of the issues in close quarters, without the the spectacle of it. Um, you know, I know an African American Shia scholars, and they probably don't even you're not even involved in this whole thing, and y- you know, I just think there's wise ways of getting your point across, in a way that can actually build alliances, not convincing necessarily others. Although I think people might be convinced of certain things if they just talk to you on a personal level. Um, but yeah, I think the particularly the African American Muslim community, we're just, we're all maybe like not 6 degrees of separation, maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation between us, and so we're still small enough where we can be a family, even across, um, these doctrinal lines. Um, um, I can add more detail, but oh yeah, I should state for my wife actually. There's a fourth point, having to do with the youth. She just, sort of made the point that when she was younger, her parents would take her to these various conferences and um, I guess talks from Muslim speakers and things like that. And then at some point, while she was still a teenager, she was actually getting involved in, doing these things. And, they had things for the youth. And I think most definitely that's something that we need to revive in the Black Muslim community. Um, just really mentorship, um, getting their ideas, see what they're into. And, you know, because I've seen so many generations of sort of, I mean, I think at least a lot of people from my generation, very few, or, really into Islam like that. Um, um, People that I knew growing up. Uh, and there's, of course, there's people who are, but, it's just different. Um, now that we're a lot older and a lot more mature. Um, yeah. So, yeah, those are my basic comments. We can add on to it.
May Allah reward you, barakallahu fikum. I
Um,
just want to, because I really want to be y'all. I talk all the time, so I'm going to try to give it to y'all. And I want to make something for both of you, yourself, Brother Maurice, and Imam Dawud. You're always welcome to this platform. I think it's needed. So when you have free time and you want to engage, hit me up. I think we don't do enough. I would actually like to see 24-hour programming. We have a lot of issues. Eventually, we build up. But to do that, one person, two people, three people can't do that. You need many people, right, to dominate the airwaves with content that is empowering to us as a qawm, as Imam Dawud said, as a people. I want to say something, because I think y'all both presented beautiful things. May Allah reward you. But one of the things I want to start with Imam Dawud is, for us as a people, we have to take responsibility. Initiatives are just that, initial startup projects. They develop through engagement. One of the things that we, and people in general, but I'm speaking of us, we like to receive, but we don't like to give. We're constant. What is in it for me? Not what do I have to give to make that a reality. And so when you're looking at the summit, sometimes we're not paying attention to all that we need and what little we work with to give us what we need. And then on top of what we need, we add what we want. Notice I separated the two. We don't have all the resources to give us what we need. So there's a distinction between a need and a want. And on top of that deficiency of not having the resources, the manpower, the commitment for what we need, we like to add on top of that what we want. And then when we see the outcome, we're kind of disappointed, realizing that it was a struggle to get us what we need in the first place, because the lack of our own commitment as a whole, as a collective, right? Like a simple thing, we have registration for events, and we register late, or we don't register at all. That develops a program issue immediately. So when you're talking about you plan for an event, we come late, which does what? Alters the whole event, which I already know. That's why I said before we started, we're going to have some behind the back passes, some alley hoops, some through the legs. Be ready. I already said that. Not because that's the way I necessarily want it. I do understand us as a people. So, I mean, this is just things to consider. And then with that aspect, we need to take responsibility. So even if I'm not a leader, I have a responsibility as an attendee, as a follower, what? To be engaged at my level, which is very important. Everybody engaging at their level. I just think that's something we need to consider, right? Like all of us, to make our endeavors successful, all of us have to play a role, right? That's just one aspect about that. And so if all of us, and I remember the statement of Sayyidina Ali in this regard, and I'll move for this point. They came to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu when he was the Khalifa. And you remember there was a lot of fitan. There was a lot of seditions during the time of Sayyidina Ali, al-Khawarij, the situation with Muawiyah, and other matters of the Islamic State. And they said to Imam Ali, they came to him, they said when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the Khalifa, and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu was in charge, we didn't have all this stuff. Now you in charge, we got all these problems. And Sayyidina Ali, who was Bab Medina to the Ilm, right? So he was aqil, you know, he was very wise. He said, I hear the complaint, I hear the criticism, I hear the constructive criticism. Let's look at it then. He said, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, they had men like me, and I got men like you. So he put the onus of responsibility in the condition of the Muslim state as to the people's engagement. What was he like Whenever Abu Bakr or Umar or Uthman called, he said, Labbaik. I hear and I obey. That was his mawqif, his station, his position. Whenever they called him, he was in. What is our position? Objection. Like Bani Israel. I hear and I disobey. And that is a habit, and we honestly know it. We are full of opinions, but not full of work. We have a lot of great ideas, but we don't implement them. And our institutions reflect that, right? And if you remember during the conference, I asked Dr. Ihsan Bagbi, may Allah protect him, about MANA. MANA, as a national organization, had great intentions, but not great workers, not great commitment. And to this day, that's still a major problem. You can have all the great ideas you want, but if you don't have people that's going to follow, that's going to implement, that's going to work hard, it's just going to remain a great idea. In fact, when you engage in that great idea, without it, it may look like a bad idea because of the lack of engagement. So as we look for improvement, and we should, and as we reflect on what we could do better, which we should, and we should strive, remember that if I desire what I'm talking about, I have to have a personal buy-in and engagement in that. Like from my own side. If I want a better community, I have to be a better member of that community. Right? It's like saying I don't want crime in my neighborhood, but every time I see a crime, I'm afraid to call the authorities. Well, how are you going to stop it if you're not willing to engage? So the same way, we should have both ends taken care of. Yes, we should encourage for more successful programs, for more organized programs, for more structured programs. But at the same time, for all that to occur, we have to consider our amount of engagement and participation and support and adherence to what we're asking for. So that's just something to think about for all of us, so that going forth, we can improve on all of our endeavors, not just the summit. I'm talking about on the ground in our local communities. Most imams are struggling because of the lack of support from their congregations. Most Black masjids are suffering because of the lack of conviction and commitment and engagement and support from their own community. We have to fix that.
I do have a comment on that. I mean, you started the program saying that there's a lot of talented people in the Muslim community, in the African American Muslim community. Do we have people who are skilled event planners, or people who are marketers, people who can help you market it in certain ways? We know that people, I'm an educator, so I know that in my students, they're not going to show up on time, they're not going to do the work and things like that. What I did was change the way that I deal with them. I changed the whole format so that it becomes a little bit easier for them to actually engage, to do things. So, I mean, I don't know how, I'm not a, marketer or anything like that, but, sometimes, people offer discounts and, they have this whole hype around, what you'll get out of, whatever it is that you're purchasing. So maybe, we can use some of those strategies from the professional world, because, our institutions, they're people are working for other institutions that are professional and they're making money and they're sustainable. Whereas like when it comes to the mosque or the, Muslim institution, it's like, it's just sort of something that we do on the side. Or
say that again. No, that's very important. That's a key element. When you make that discussion, that's true. We should engage each other. But there's an element you're missing You said it, but I don't think you focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was told this, it was probably the greatest lesson I received as an imam. When you talked about those professionals, you mentioned something that I think you should highlight. They're working in their field. And when they're working in their field, what is happening in that too, in that process? They are being,
managed.
no, they're being compensated.
Yeah, being compensated.
And that's a big issue. And the compensation comes from funding, whether it's through business, whether that company that hires that talent, they hire that talent. And I remember I was told this, probably one of the best lessons I've ever learned. They said to me, a person said to me, volunteers do what they want, employees do what they're told. That was like, that statement for me changed the whole outlook on how to run the masjid. And I noticed when we pay people, we don't have all of the issues. When you don't pay people, you're going to have their optional engagement. They don't feel, unless it's a conviction in the heart, that I must do this. And I've heard many people say, even during the summit, hey, I got a real job. Wow. In the masjid, I got a real job. And I understand that. So when we talk about this, right? Never forget, the lack of this is why we see our programs look the way they look. The onus will always come back to us, right, when we think about it. So it's easy to say, yes, you have a profession. And us, behind the scenes, we got fake piety. A lot of us are like this. Outwardly, we'll say, free sabilillah, as Imam Dawud says, right? But behind the scenes, yo, Imam, I got to get paid. And don't tell nobody I'm getting paid.
You notice what he said, not fi sabilillah, free sabilillah.
So let me go on, but we'll come. You see, these a lot of things are discussions, right? It's much more detailed and nuanced than we think, right? And behind the scenes, I can give you an example of that, but that has to be off the screen. But that happens. False public piety. Don't give me a check and let people know I'm getting a check, but behind the scenes, demand a check. That happens a lot. And imams know what I'm talking about. Anyone who does that knows what I'm talking about. But let's move from that. But so there's, from the side of us, engaging is who we can engage and incorporating who we can incorporate. The other side is developing a collective buy-in for our objectives, right? So those two aspects, and we can flush them out. But let me move quickly because y'all said y'all only got a few minutes and I want to finish up. The other question was the third point, because the first point, I agree with you 100%. We need engagement because we're in American society. Imam Dawud, that's his life, and this is my life. So we understand that definitely. I won't necessarily say the imam needs to do that. I think that's a mistake because it contradicts the second point you're asking about. I think the imam needs to be aware of it, and he needs people around him who are paid to engage. We need to pay people. We have to stop running our masjids and our institutions as broke charities. They don't work. We need to have people who look at that as an integral part of the society. And it needs to be funded. It needs to be, because listen, I go to meetings all the time. In the church, it's like that. In the synagogue, it's like that. So we would have political meetings, Everyone is on salary except the Muslim. And that's why they get all of the things to their church or to their synagogue, and the mosque is always last because the mosque is never there. One part from what Imam Dawud is talking about from theology, right? And the understanding the deen, that's one point. But even when they know, they're not funded. Do you know the average salary for the top pastors and rabbis in my area is $100,000? That's what they get paid. The head pastor, he's like 106 and probably got a raise by that. And the rabbi is like 125. That's their base salary. Those salaries is more than the average African masjid gets from donations from their congregations. The salary alone for the pastor or the rabbi is more than the gross income of the masjid itself in a lot of our communities. So these are things that we should think about. So how are you going to compete in such a field when your mindset doesn't even push you to establish your institution? These are real things that we have to consider. And as an imam, and Imam Dawud is an imam, you can go around and you see this. This is obvious, right? So these things need to be taken into consideration when we look at our condition. The other thing, the third thing, so that number two is the Darul Iftar, which is having a committee of learned people who give religious rulings to our situation. We have to develop the qualifications of our people to give legal judgments, right? In order to establish this Darul Iftar, this abode of juristic rulings and opinions, fatwa, you have to have people who you respect to do that job. And going to point one, in our communities, predominantly, the Wahhabi doctrine has been a source of nullifying that. In our context, and it's not picking on a group of people, every time has its issues, has the things it must confront. In the 60s, in the 50s, you might have been talking about the Nation of Islam, right? Maybe in the 80s, you might have been talking about Darul Islam. But from the mid-80s up to today, you're talking about Al-Wahhabiyya by the name of Salafiyya in our communities. That's the dominant ideology that is spread either explicitly or implicitly in the minds of people, our people. Most of our people, if they're not a flag, a card-carrying Wahhabi Salafi, they are default Wahhabi Salafi and don't know it. That's a reality that we cannot escape. So if you're talking about having Darul Iftar, so where are the legal rulings going to come from? Are we going to take the legal rulings of the slave master in the form of the Saudi government that is a puppet of the American government, and we go full circle? We are running to Islam from white supremacy and then going right back into it through Saudi Arabian influence. This is a real fact. It has, and that's politics. The first one, you said we must be engaging in politics. Well, let's engage in politics as Malcolm did. It was international politics. If we're discussing all of these things, they were politically playing on the Black community from abroad, and the American government was right behind all of them. If we're talking about being politically astute, right? So we have to be fair in our analysis of the whole picture and critically think our way through our problems, not superficially ignoring what is uncomfortable, if you follow my point. So in our communities, you're going to have a demolishing, if we follow that Wahhabi idea, of the very sources that you saw in Egypt in Dar al-Iftah. Dar al-Iftah in Egypt is according to the four schools of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali. If we follow what is in our country, what is predominant among the masajid, which is over 90% of the masajid, are influenced by Wahhabi thought. That's going to nullify everything you're talking about establishing, if you think about it, right?
So,
Go ahead.
I would like to say, so over the past probably 4 years or so, I've actually studied pretty closely with a brother who in Egypt. He's Egyptian, and he's one of the few Hanbali scholars in Egypt.
Sheikh Yusuf ibn Sadiq?
No, his name is Dr. Hatem Al Ansari.
Okay.
But he also worked, in Saudi Arabia in their legal system. Now he doesn't like, Salafi, Wahhabi, anything. If he has any of those people in his class, he would do his best to get them out of his classes. But what he told me was that in Saudi Arabia, they don't even believe, they can't build their society off of, this ideology of Wahhabism. So they kind of look around and try to see the next best thing for their courts when it comes to like family law, to finances and things like that. They say, okay, we're Hanbali in this regard. So no one really believes that they can build society off of, the ideology of Wahhabism.
Keep this in mind. That's in a government in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Which the ahkam of the government is by al-Hanabila, right? Al-Fiqh al-Hanbali. True.
Yes.
But do you realize when it comes to us, that doctrine doesn't represent the government?
Yes, I know.
When it's put in our community, it's put opposite of that.
Islam in general is not associated with the government.
Right. So here's my point.
It's something that you do
when they come to us. So we're talking about practical application. So you described and this is my problem with a lot of our brothers who studied abroad. It's like you studied abroad and then you got amnesia when you came back to America. That's really offensive to me because I studied abroad. We know all these things. So no government is established or legal rulings in that society except that it comes through the four schools, even in Saudi Arabia, right?
Yes.
We get here and say, well, we don't follow madhabs, which is a Wahhabi ideology from their ideology originally. And that was given to our community, and then it becomes embodied in our community, right? How do you answer that? Besides ignoring and acting like it doesn't exist, when it's a real thing.
If I can chime in, and this is why the fiqh al-waqi, or the facts from the ground, are different, because as you said that in Saudi Arabia, even though this dawah has been predominant, the government doesn't run society like that. Let's just go to Philadelphia, for instance, where this is like the de facto understanding of Islam. The people there who are preaching and teaching this actually believe that this is supposed to be the implemented reality on the ground. Right, so there's a marked difference, and this hence why when we are giving this dawah and trying to deconstruct this ideology, even not even so primarily for them, because they declared all of us deviants or Sufis, but it's like what Dr. Carl Woodson wrote called The Miseducation of the Negro, right? Well, we have to do tahdhib and Negro, meaning that we have a lot of de facto Wahhabi ideas and understandings, though we call ourselves Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And hence, so in order for us to get our community straight, we have to flush out and kind of like dissolve or clarify these misconceptions so that we can move forward as a people. And this is part of like Imam Amin didn't get to point 3, but this is why at least I myself said, look, you believe this, you believe that. Oh, you never been a so-called Salafi, but this is a Wahhabi belief you have, and this is why it's a Wahhabi belief, and this is why it doesn't conform with the madhab of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, his real madhab, or al Ash'ira or al Maturidiyya, and then this is the correct belief according to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah.
Look at it this way, though. Look at it from this, because we all have a general concern. I even think our brothers, and this happened in the Wahhabi Salafi community, that they realize that we all have a collective problem, which we're talking about. So we having this. Now we're trying to solve that problem. How do we solve a problem without dealing with it?
Well, you got to start where people are at. I mean, people aren't always, 100% ready to give up everything that they've learned or supposedly learned. You kind of just have to start with the issue. You have to show that you have value to them. You can add value to their lives, by doing what you do from your understanding. There was a brother who, I don't know. I was in one of the New Jersey masjids last summer, and I guess the brother just saw me reading Surah Al-Kahf or something like that, and he was kind of like, you can read Arabic. He's a Salafi, African American Salafi brother, and he said no one.
Can I help
said
you out
no
here?
one. What's
If
that?
you're going to say Salafi, be fair.
Yes, sir.
I think we got to stop being unjust in our position. If you're going to say Salafi, you know Salafi is Wahhabi. You do know that, right
Yes,
or wrong?
Yes, sir.
So
I'm not getting involved in the whole.
No. Then you're lying to us. Listen, and I know you don't mean that intentionally. Listen to what I mean. Follow what I mean. When you say I'm not going to get into that, when an idea is put forth, if people can't identify truth, you've deceived them. Follow my point, even if you have good intentions. And as a student and as a educated person, one of the most treacherous things that you find in academia is when falsehood is presented as truth. As a researcher, that bothers you, doesn't it?
Yes.
One of the point, because I have to get going. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he said that if you don't speak the truth and I don't speak the truth, then how will the people know between the difference of what is sahih and what is saqim? Meaning what is healthy and sound and what is sick. So it has to be made clear and has to be made plain.
So the point that I was trying to make was that he was saying that he was trying to say that no one in that masjid could read the Quran in Arabic except the Imam. I don't think that's true, but he was very jaded. We had a few phone conversations. He was very jaded by what happened in that community. He only goes there to pray every now and then, and he doesn't deal with the community like that. But he does have a connection with the Quran. He said, he wants to learn the Quran before he dies. He wants to learn how to read in Arabic. He wants to memorize and such and such. So you can start with that thing that people actually are looking for. Yes, they might not be able. I told him, I'm not, a Wahhabi. I don't believe in, that sort of thing. But he was kind of looking for inspiration, for to study, to learn the Quran. Maybe people are only in love with the Quran. If you can catch them like that, and then correct beliefs as they sort of pop up, or inconsistencies or anything of that nature, you have to deal with people one to one, or at least on the issues that they are that they're having troubles with, before you kind of attack these, high level,
I
issues.
don't think these are high
But
level issues.
one point real quick though.
Okay, we
We
got
never,
hey, we got to have part two because this has to be
yeah,
flushed
we
out.
get part two. We never said at the conference, no one ever said going into a masjid and saying, yeah, Wahhabi, where Wahhabis are at. No, but amongst our people in our masajid, in our conferences, we have to clarify things. And whether that sounds polemical or not, we're not going into their so-called home turf. We're amongst ourselves clarifying the positions of the proper aqidah and the proper positions on tasawwuf according to traditional Sunni Islam. So if we can't do it in our own spots, our own gatherings, in our own conference, then when can we do it? No one's saying going into, I'm not going to go into Germantown Masjid and say, yeah, ayyuhal Wahhabiyya. Like, no one's going to do that. I know I'll probably get shot doing that, right? Or at the least, maybe would call me.
Hey, we might have to do that
Dawud
because
right
one
there.
of the
No one's
women
going to
went
do
and
that.
did that. She was a courageous little young lady. She went in.
Anyway, I gotta bounce,
Okay.
Imam Amin. I gotta get going to the office.
You.
All
But
right.
listen, we can't leave the people with a cliffhanger, so we have to reassemble. So please immediately tell me when y'all free so we can continue this because we can't leave them like this, right?
Inshallah.
Because this is a whole, I think we need to flush this point out. But we'll let you go, Imam Dawud, and I know he got to go, but I just want to say one thing before you go, Brother Maurice. Barakallahu bikum. Salam alaikum, Imam Dawud.
Alaikum salam.
Here's what I like to say.
Mm-hmm.
You got 3 master's degrees, right?
Yes, sir.
So that means you did a lot of education. And there's a lot of research in your education. Why, when it comes to Islamic knowledge, right, we don't do such thorough critical research? Because at the end of, when you're putting your theses, you're defending your position against positions that may be prominently known, dominant in the society, and that what makes your thesis so strong is that you defend it with vigor against something else that's existing, an idea, a thought, a common practice. So that's what you did. Am I correct?
Yes, but the number of people that I expect to read my thesis is very small.
Nevertheless,
yeah,
it is a position, it's published,
yes.
and it goes down in the record.
Yes, sir.
Right? And here's the other thing. Maybe in academia, they'll say, oh, this is for the elite, smart people, and you lower class people or uneducated people, we just give you the judgment at the end of the day, but we actually did the research at the end of the day. And our deen is similar.
Yes.
And if we're going to have our own Darul Iftar, there need be some African Americans who can critically deal with issues.
Yes.
Not when it comes to worldly sciences, we are energetic and we are forthright in defending our positions and stating the facts and researching and spending hours and hours. Then when it comes to Islam, oh, it's not that important. It's not necessary. Well, it was necessary when you were getting your master's degree or your doctorate, your PhD, or you were it was, you spent hours and nights and days and traveled and researched. Why, when it comes to deen, there is a different status. It's really something to think about. Because in religion, we're going to do more research than you would ever imagine doing for your PhD. I'm talking about study. I'm talking about Islamic research, sources, and it's a much wider body of literature and material that you have to. And what I contend to us, we've become so disengaged in Islamic scholarship and learning that we've let the common people dictate the course of Islamic learning, which is, I think, is a problem because it's going to be deficient because of the capacity of common people. And I'm talking about just the regular everyday layman. So that Darul Iftar can't be layman. It has to be people who actually did research. Yes. And to make a legal judgment, you're going to do a lot of research for one judgment, one ruling. And if you studied in the courts in Egypt, if you really went to see and sat, that's a lot of work. And it's not the work of one individual. That's a body of scholarship examining al-kutub al-fiqhiyya, the books of al-fiqh, according to the madhahib, not just muqtasarat, but hawashi and books of ifta, books of fatawa. All of that goes into sometimes one legal judgment, right? So we can't simplify our religion, which the Wahhabis have done by saying Quran and Sunnah. In your own studies, in your own traveling, you know that's ridiculous. In your own, as a learned person, as one who's traveled and studied 6 years in Egypt, in academia, you know this stuff doesn't make sense from the side of reality of what we want. So I think there is a need to say, hey, this is wrong. And this is why, not as an attack, but as a clarification so that we can develop to what we're talking about, if you follow my point.
Yes, I do follow your point. That's not exactly what my point is, but I think, you know, yes, we have the hukm, but we also need the hikmah. You know, we're dealing with the population of people who opt into religion. Alhamdulillah, everyone who's Muslim, you know, ideally here in the U.S. is Muslim because they want to be Muslim. And I guess one of the things that I'm not really hearing, you know, a lot from the African American Muslim community is that, you know, they're not really answering the questions of the times. And I don't know how much you've looked through my blog, or, you know, or if you read the thesis or anything like that. You know, it is research within you know, the Islamic tradition, but I'm using it. I'm using what I'm researching, particularly history, in order to respond to some of the questions of our times, having to do particularly around some of the questions that the Afrocentric, or, you know, so-called conscious, you know, community throws towards the African American Muslims. And I'm going into the tradition. You know, I'm reading, you know, ancient texts basically, in order to sort of flesh it out and come to a conclusion. And I think when we're speaking, we should say, no, we're not just speaking to Muslims that believe the same way that we believe, or even slightly, you know, different from us. We're speaking to, you know, the broader Black community, and we're also speaking to the rest of America and anyone who speaks English. And I also think we should be speaking, you know, back in Arabic. We should be producing our own text in Arabic, from our perspective.
But here's my question to you,
Yes,
and I agree with you 100%. I think, but that's going to be a division of labor among us.
yes.
We can't expect everyone to do everything.
Yes.
So, and you know, that's important. When we're talking about the challenges of the time, the challenge of the time that looks like for me may not look like the same for you.
Yes.
We come from different areas. It amazes me where I live in an area, I live in a region where we are overwhelmed with certain ideologies. To sometimes those ideologies led to bloodshed.
Yes.
And then the one who lives in a place where that ideology doesn't exist comes to us and dictates on us how to deal with our real life, still to this day situation, right? So and I tell people all the time, I don't have the luxury as an imam in the Northeast region where we're dominated by a certain ideology that I can remain silent, or I can use the word wisdom for silence. if you understand. So I'm doing it with hikmah, which really equates to sukut, silence, right? I'm not saying not in your case. I'm saying in general. A lot of times, while we're silent, the one who is attacking you is loud, financed, and you're silent.
Mm-hmm.
How is it ever going to change? So when we talk about real life stuff, I think we got to examine everything contextually.
Yes.
Right? And what does it look like on the ground?
Yeah. I mean, hikmah. I mean, maybe I would define that as just thinking creatively about how we do things. I mean, some of the times we've run our head up against the wall, trying to do things one way, but there are a million other ways that we can get the same thing accomplished. So if we can think more creatively as a community, I think I think that would solve a lot of that would get us around a lot of these issues.
Don't you see a Malcolm Martin moment happening right now? Do you observe? Do you observe?
Well, I'm of the opinion that they grew closer towards the end of their lives. So
I know what I'm saying. Do you understand that this dichotomy exists still today, even within Islam and the Black community, right? Where every approach is needed in its proper context,
yes,
right? Every approach, because I look at what we've done and I look at other people, what they've done, and I see the benefit in both. I see the benefit in the academic approach, and I also see the benefit in the traditional Sunni approach. I also see the need for an elite class and the need for a grassroots class. I see the need, but what happens is, and I'm telling you, the biggest struggle with the summit is this difference between the elite of the Black African American Muslims and the grassroots. I see it all the time. And because I can float between the two, it becomes obvious to me that this is a problem, right? For some, we're too radical, the Black imams. And for us, we have a segment of people that need us. And then there is another segment of people who need the intellectuals among us, the secularly educated. And I think personally, our collective enemy, which we act like ain't our enemy, but still working, has used this divide to keep us from advancing, right? And it's not just a Salafi divide or Wahhabi divide. Even within Sunniism, it still exists. And you would know that better than I if we call it. So what I'm saying is this: we have the tools that we need to build, but we have to tie our ropes. I like to say it better that way. You can do things I can't do, and I can do things you won't do. Do you see my point? And I think together we have to say, you know what? Imam Amin, you're good for that. Brother Maurice, you're good for that. Imam Dawud, you're good for that. And then those who are good for those things need to sit down as men. And I have a big problem with us being men. Stop being so soft that you can't have a conversation, even if it's bitter. Sit down, be a man, let's deal with it, because it's necessary. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking about in general. As a people, we need it. We desperately need men, real men, because we're facing what? On the other end, men. The enemies of Islam are men, and they're willing to die for their cause. If we only can intellectualize, theorize our stuff, but when it comes to actual struggle and work, we disappear, then we need soldiers, right? We need soldiers on the ground, but we also need those who can go in the room with a suit and a tie and with letters and do that too. We need professionals. We need business people. We need career-oriented people. We need entrepreneurs.
Yes. Do
We
we
need
have any
all.
of this on paper?
That's your
Sorry, I
job.
need to go in a few
That's your job.
minutes, but yeah,
That's
do we
your
have?
job.
Hmm.
Hear how we work? That's your job. You got to be my Alex Haley. Did you get it? You caught that one?
Gotcha.
Malcolm wasn't a writer. He was a speaker. He was a worker who documented his work and his speech. Alex Haley. So we all benefit, and then they need to say, hey, that wasn't a good analysis. Here's the real Malcolm. These are the intellectuals. Malcolm wasn't an intellectual. Malcolm was a grassroots person, right? But his benefit still needs to be worked out. That's the job of the academics. But those grassroots people got to make sure the academics don't ruin his reputation and ruin his reality with their wisdom, if you get my point.
Yes. But by the way, I'm a grassroots person, so.
Oh, bro, all right. That's even better. An intellectual grassroots person.
I'm
So
not
let's do it.
intellectual, but I just do things that are
Right?
smart.
Listen. So now that's a responsibility.
Yes.
So we sit behind the stage and we sit down and we put it together, right? You're a writer. And as I told, since I put a plug, I told Brother Akil Fad, you know Akil, right?
Yes, sir.
Akil, do you know Brother Maurice? Does he know you or you just know him? Have y'all met?
At the conference. Yeah, but we've been in communications before.
You, him, Dr. Rasul Miller, all y'all are in the same thing, right? Y'all need to get together. Y'all need to take all these initiatives. Y'all need to analyze it. Y'all need to list it out and then sit with those who are actually in it and then let's put it together. That's how we work. I can't do what you do. I wouldn't even try. I'm not a writer, right? But I have volumes in my brain. I have volumes of experience. That's your job to write all that stuff down and to make it look nice. And that's what I told Akil. No, it is. I can't do it. I have no problem. And guess what? Just as I can confidently say I can't do that, I can confidently say you can't do what I do. It's no problem. I know you can't do what I do. I'm not going to never ask you to do what I do. Likewise, but I'm going to do what I do. Don't ask me to do what you do. You do what you do, right? And then together, right? Together, we'll get the job done. You follow my point?
Inshallah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
let us work. Hey, listen, you've met me. You know I'm a forthright type of guy, right? So it's all love, but we have and we don't got that much time. You're 40, I'm 53. We're gonna die. And don't deprive future generations of our expertise. Don't deprive them of that, right? They deserve that we do the best we can do with the tools we have. They deserve it because we're living the result of it not being fully done. So we're living it. Let's not do the same. And I'll let you close out with whatever last comment you have. Sorry for extending your time.
No problem. I don't really have too many other comments. I mean, I do a lot of different things. I have my hands in a lot of different things. Maybe one comment I would make is, you know, maybe we should be looking for grant money. Uh, if we're working through nonprofit organizations, then there's a lot of grant money that you can get for different projects. Um, you know, Doing it piecemeal, just one project at a time, where you get the funding, you can pay people, you can, do what you need to do um, through these various projects. And then, you know, you can have your overall mission that you're working towards. Um, I mean, we probably have a lot of grant writers in our communities. We have people that know how to structure sort of small projects, do project management. Um, I mean, I think we have more resources than we know, and oftentimes we just need to tap into the right people uh, who can do the things. So, I did a project downtown. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We used to feed homeless people in Durham, North Carolina, and you know, I was kind of the de facto head of that. And every week, it just seemed like a miracle happened. We had more food than we could. We're feeding homeless people, but sometimes there's more food than they can eat. So, I think Allah's bounty is is for everyone, and we have enough. We just need to you know to
I'm laughing. Read that statement. That's funny.
just like to.
He knows me very well. That's funny. No, what I mean by that, and I say this, that's
Mhm,
true.
mhm,
But let us not, as a people, rely on the government to do our own work. I'm not saying don't do it at all.
mhm.
It's for what we need it for in certain areas and certain people. But we must learn to do for ourselves.
Yes, I understand, but I think we need to change our mindset about that, because the government is just the people, and we're part of. We live here, we pay taxes,
Yeah.
so we should be getting some
That's
of that
that's a
money.
bigger, greater discussion.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with you. It's just layers to it,
Yes.
right? It's layers. And here's what I'm saying. For us as a people, I believe when we do for ourselves, it has multiple levels of honor and dignity.
Yes.
If I earn my own money and I do my own projects, I own it. I never feel indebted to no one else. And as a people, it produces a level of pride that we desperately need. But what I say, I don't rule out what you're talking about. Everything in its context, right? Everything has its context. Everything. And I think discussing context is very important. I mean, so I am not opposed to that, but I'm also diligently pushing us to do for ourselves by our own hands. As the Prophet ﷺ said, the best living livelihood is the livelihood of your own hand, right? And that's from him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I believe we have more potential. I believe we have more potential than we give ourselves. Like you said, we have skill sets. Once we learn to really love ourselves, I believe we have everything we're looking for from anyone else. But that's going to take us loving. In the meanwhile, I think we may need, in some areas, not in all, to take your suggestion. Like what you're doing. I think that's the area.
Yeah, it needs to be strategic. Yes.
Right. I agree. So, all right. I hope this ain't the last of our talk. I know it won't because it hasn't before, but it's appreciated. And inshallah, may Allah make it easy for both of us. Let's end up with Al-Fatiha. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين سبحان ربك رب العزه عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين بسير اسرار الفاتحه. Barakallahu fikum. Let me tell you, I love you and I appreciate you. And we're going to, inshallah, get some work done.
Inshallah.
The next summit is going to look a little bit different because we're going to add that piece,
Yes.
those elements, we're going to add them, and you're going to help, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Can we count on you publicly?
Yeah. Of course.
That's a public commitment.
Yes.
All right. I love you, Aki. Barakallahu fikum. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.